I went to 11 Madison Park to catch my cheating wife. Instead, I met a woman who made me question everything about love. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. I was sitting at my desk, half listening to the quiet hum of my laptop while finishing up the last few emails of the day. Outside the apartment window, the sky was turning that soft shade of orange that always shows up right before sunset. The kind of evening that usually felt calm, predictable. My phone buzzed on the desk. At first, I ignored it. But when it buzzed again, the screen lighting up the corner of my workspace, I glanced over. The message was from Jason, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in months. That alone felt unusual. I picked up the phone and opened the message. "Hey man, this might sound weird, but I think I saw your wife yesterday." I frowned slightly. I typed back quickly. "Yeah. Where?" A few seconds passed before the reply came through. "At 11 Madison Park." That made me pause. It wasn't the kind of place my wife normally went to. It was the kind of restaurant people booked weeks in advance for anniversaries or special occasions. Still, that didn't mean anything. Maybe she went with coworkers. Maybe it was a client dinner. I leaned back in my chair, already ready to brush it off. Then my phone buzzed again. She wasn't alone. Something about those 3 words made my stomach tighten just a little. I stared at the message, reading it again. And again. My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally typed back. "What do you mean?" This time the reply took longer. A full minute passed. Then another. Just when I was about to set the phone down, another message appeared. I didn't want to say anything, but it looked like a date. For a moment, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it felt ridiculous. My wife. On a date. Jason must have seen someone who looked like her. That had to be it. I started typing a reply telling him he must be mistaken. But before I could press send, another message appeared. A photo. My thumb hesitated for a second before tapping it open. The picture filled the screen. And suddenly the room felt very quiet. It was her. There was no doubt about that. My wife sat across from a man I had never seen before. The table between them was lit by soft candlelight, plates arranged neatly like something out of a magazine. But it wasn't the setting that made my chest feel tight. It was her expression. She was leaning slightly forward, her elbows resting near the edge of the table, smiling in that relaxed, genuine way I knew so well. It wasn't a polite smile. It was the kind she used when she was truly enjoying someone's company. I realized I had been holding my breath. Slowly, I set the phone down on the desk. My mind began searching for explanations. Maybe it was a work meeting. Maybe the photo was taken at the wrong moment. Maybe, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Jason. "Sorry, man. I thought you should know." I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up the phone again and looked at the photo one more time. This time, my eyes drifted past the man sitting across from her. To the small details. The way she tilted her head slightly while listening. The soft smile on her lips. The body language. It all looked comfortable. Familiar. And that was the moment a quiet, unsettling thought slipped into my mind. If this really was what it looked like, then how long had it been happening? I stared at the name of the restaurant in Jason's earlier message. 11 Madison Park. After a long moment, I opened a new tab on my laptop and searched for it. If answers existed anywhere, I had a strange feeling they might start there. The next evening, I stood across the street from 11 Madison Park, staring up at the tall windows glowing warmly against the fading dusk. For a moment, I considered turning around. The whole idea suddenly felt ridiculous. Walking into a restaurant because of a single photo and a few messages from a friend, it sounded like the kind of impulsive decision people regret later. But the image from the night before kept replaying in my mind. The candlelight. The smile on my wife's face. The man sitting across from her. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped forward and pushed open the heavy glass door. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and elegant. Soft lighting filled the room, reflecting off polished wooden floors and white tablecloths arranged with quiet precision. Conversations floated through the air in low, gentle murmurs, accompanied by the occasional clink of glassware. For a moment, I felt completely out of place. The hostess greeted me with a warm, professional smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" I hesitated just long enough to feel slightly embarrassed. "Actually, no. I was hoping to get a table." She glanced down at the screen in front of her. "We're quite full tonight," she said politely, then added, "but if you'd like, you can sit at the bar while we check for any cancellations." I nodded quickly. "That would be great." A few seconds later, I found myself sitting at the polished bar counter. The dim lighting above reflected faintly off the surface, and the bartender slid a menu in front of me with a friendly nod. But I barely looked at it. Instead, my eyes wandered slowly around the room. Couples leaned toward each other in quiet conversation. A few tables were celebrating something, their laughter soft but genuine. Everything about the place felt warm and intimate, the kind of atmosphere designed for meaningful evenings. Which made the photo from last night feel even heavier. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice someone take the seat beside me until I heard the soft sound of a chair being pulled out. "First time here?" The voice was calm and warm, carrying a gentle confidence. I turned slightly. The woman sitting next to me looked to be in her early 40s, maybe 43 or 44. She wore a simple black dress that suited the elegant setting perfectly, her posture relaxed but graceful. Her dark hair fell neatly over one shoulder, and there was something observant in the way her eyes studied the room. And now, apparently, me. I gave a small, distracted smile. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled back, the expression easy and natural. "Only a little," she said lightly. "Most people who come here look excited. You look like you're trying to solve a mystery." I couldn't help letting out a quiet laugh. She wasn't wrong. "I guess you could say that," I admitted. The bartender placed a glass of water in front of me, and the woman gently slid the menu a little closer in my direction. Her fingers brushed mine for the briefest moment. It was accidental, probably meaningless. But after the tension of the past 24 hours, the small contact felt strangely grounding. She noticed my hesitation and tilted her head slightly. "Waiting for someone?" she asked. I glanced down at the bar, thinking about how to answer that. Finally, I said the first honest thing that came to mind. "I'm not sure." That seemed to intrigue her. "Well," she said, her tone warm and slightly amused, "if your mystery guest doesn't show up." "I'm Elena." She extended her hand casually. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I shook it. Her handshake was gentle but confident, her palm warm against mine. "I'm Daniel," I replied. She smiled. "Nice to meet you, Daniel." Neither of us knew it yet. But that quiet introduction, at a bar inside a restaurant I had walked into looking for answers, was the beginning of something neither of us had expected. At first, the conversation felt casual. The kind strangers sometimes have when they happen to share the same space for a few minutes. Small comments about the restaurant, the menu, the atmosphere. But something about Elena made the moment feel easier than it should have. She had a calm presence, the kind that made silence feel comfortable instead of awkward. When she spoke, she didn't rush her words, and when she listened, she actually looked at you, not past you, not at her phone, but directly at you. The bartender brought her a glass of red wine, and she thanked him with a warm smile before turning slightly toward me again. "So," she said, resting one elbow lightly on the bar, "what kind of mystery brings someone here without a reservation?" I hesitated. Part of me wondered if it was strange to share something personal with someone I had just met. But another part of me, the heavier, quieter part, felt oddly relieved by the idea of saying it out loud. Maybe because she didn't know me. Maybe because she had nothing to lose by hearing it. I exhaled slowly. A friend texted me yesterday, I began. He said he saw my wife here. Elena's expression didn't change much, but her attention sharpened slightly. Here, she asked gently. I nodded. With someone else. The words felt strange leaving my mouth. Saying them made the situation feel more real than the photo ever had. For a moment, Elena didn't speak. She simply let the silence settle, giving the moment space instead of filling it with quick reactions. I'm sorry, she said quietly after a moment. There was no dramatic sympathy in her voice, just sincerity. I shrugged lightly, trying to look more composed than I actually felt. I'm still not even sure what it means, I admitted. Maybe it's nothing. She studied me for a second, then smiled softly. That's usually the first thing we tell ourselves. I let out a quiet breath of laughter. Yeah, I said. I guess it is. The bartender eventually asked if we were ready for a table. Elena glanced at me before answering. Would you mind sharing, she asked. Unless you're expecting someone. I looked around the restaurant again, the soft lighting, the quiet conversations, the same atmosphere that had existed in that photo. And suddenly the idea of sitting alone felt heavier than before. I'd like that, I said. A few minutes later, we were seated at a small table near one of the tall windows. Outside, the city lights had started to glow softly against the darkening evening. Dinner arrived slowly, giving us time to talk between courses. Elena told me she was an architect who had lived in the city for nearly 20 years. She spoke about her work with quiet passion, the way certain buildings made people feel safe, or calm, or inspired. When I asked if she had always lived alone, she smiled faintly. I was married once, she said. A long time ago. Something in her tone carried the kind of experience that didn't need long explanations. What happened? I asked carefully. She swirled the wine in her glass thoughtfully. We slowly stopped seeing each other, she said. Even when we were in the same room. There was no bitterness in her voice. Just honesty. At some point during the conversation, I realized something surprising. I hadn't checked my phone once. Not for messages. Not for updates. Not even to look at the photo again. And when I struggled to find the right words to explain how confused I felt about everything, Elena reached across the table and gently rested her hand over mine. The touch was soft and brief. But warm. Grounding. And for the first time since that message arrived, my mind felt quiet. By the time dinner ended, the restaurant had grown quieter. Most of the tables around us were empty now, the soft glow of the overhead lights reflecting off polished glass and silverware as the staff slowly began clearing the room. What had started as an unexpected conversation between strangers had somehow stretched across the entire evening. I hadn't planned to stay that long. But with Elena, time had slipped by almost unnoticed. When we finally stepped outside, the night air felt cool and refreshing after the warmth of the restaurant. The city had settled into that calm rhythm it takes on late in the evening, traffic lighter, conversations softer, the distant hum of life continuing quietly in the background. A light rain had passed earlier, leaving the pavement dark and reflective beneath the street lights. Elena paused near the entrance and glanced up at the sky. Looks like we missed the rain, she said with a faint smile. I nodded, sliding my hands into my jacket pockets. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she gestured casually down the sidewalk. Do you mind walking a little? She asked. I live a few blocks from here. Something about the easy way she asked made it feel natural. Sure, I said. We started down the street together, our footsteps echoing softly against the quiet pavement. The glow from storefront windows and street lamps painted warm reflections along the wet ground as we walked. For a while, we didn't say much. And strangely, the silence felt comfortable. After everything that had been running through my mind for the past day, the calm pace of the walk felt grounding. Eventually Elena spoke again. You handled tonight better than most people would, she said gently. I looked over at her. I'm not sure about that, I admitted. She gave a small shrug. You didn't storm into the restaurant looking for a confrontation. I didn't know who I'd be confronting, I said with a quiet laugh. She smiled slightly at that. As we reached a corner, I hesitated for a moment while waiting for the traffic light to change. Elena noticed and lightly placed her hand around my arm, guiding me forward as the signal shifted. The gesture was small and natural. But I was suddenly very aware of the warmth of her hand resting against my sleeve. We crossed the street together before she slowly let go. Sorry, she said softly. Habit. It's okay, I replied, though the faint warmth from the contact lingered longer than I expected. A few steps later, she glanced at me again. You asked earlier what happened in my marriage, she said. I nodded. She looked ahead as she spoke, her voice thoughtful but calm. It didn't end because of one big moment, she explained. There wasn't some dramatic betrayal. What was it then? I asked. We just stopped choosing each other. Her words settled quietly between us. At first, it's small things, she continued. Longer hours at work. Fewer conversations. Eventually you realize you're sharing a house with someone, but you're no longer really part of each other's lives. I thought about the photo again. About the smile on my wife's face. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe the truth had started long before that dinner. Elena glanced at me. Have you talked to her yet? She asked gently. I shook my head. No. She nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. You probably should, she said softly. I exhaled, watching my breath briefly cloud in the cool air. Yeah, I admitted. I probably should. We walked another block before she slowed slightly, turning toward me. Her expression was warm but thoughtful. Whatever the truth is, she said, you deserve to hear it. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled gently. And for what it's worth. I'm glad you came to that restaurant tonight. Something about the way she said it made the night feel unexpectedly important. And as we continued walking beneath the quiet glow of the streetlights, I realized something surprising. For the first time since that message arrived, my thoughts weren't entirely about my wife anymore. When I finally returned to my apartment that night, the silence inside felt heavier than usual. Normally, my wife would already be home by that time. The soft glow of the living room lamp would be on, maybe the quiet sound of a TV show playing in the background while she scrolled through her phone on the couch. But tonight the place felt still. I set my keys down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, staring at my phone. Elena's question from earlier echoed in my mind. Have you talked to her yet? The answer was still no. And the longer I avoided the conversation, the more complicated it felt. I walked slowly into the living room and sat down on the edge of the couch, the same place we had shared countless quiet evenings together. My thumb hovered over my wife's contact name on the screen. Part of me wanted to keep pretending everything was normal. To wait. To hope there was some explanation that would make the photo meaningless. But deep down, I knew the uncertainty was worse than the truth. Before I could overthink it again, I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice. Then 3 times. Finally, she answered. Hey, she said casually. Everything okay? Her voice sounded normal. Too normal. For a moment, I almost lost the courage to continue. Yeah, I said quietly. I just wanted to talk for a minute. There was a small pause on the other end. Sure, she replied. I leaned back slightly on the couch, trying to steady my thoughts. Were you at 11 Madison Park yesterday? I asked. The silence that followed was subtle, but unmistakable. It lasted only a few seconds. But it told me more than words could have. Why? She asked carefully. A friend saw you there, I said. Another pause. This one longer. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded different, quieter, more cautious. Daniel, I closed my eyes for a moment, already feeling the answer forming in the space between us. Who was the man you were with? I asked gently. There was no anger in my voice. Just a need for honesty. She exhaled slowly. And then the truth came out. She told me she had been seeing someone else. Not for long, she insisted. A few months. It had started as conversations after work, then dinners, then something more. As she spoke, I waited for the wave of anger or heartbreak I had imagined for the past day. But strangely, it didn't arrive the way I expected. Instead, there was a quiet stillness. Almost like hearing something that had been slowly approaching for a long time. So that's it? I asked after she finished. I didn't plan for it to happen, she said softly. I believed her. But that didn't really change anything. After a few more calm words, we ended the call without yelling or accusations. Just two people acknowledging something that had already broken. When the call ended, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the blank screen of my phone. The truth was painful. But it was also strangely clarifying. Later that morning, after a restless night, I found myself thinking about the previous evening again. About the quiet restaurant. The long conversation. The walk through the city streets. And Elena. Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened my messages and typed a short text. Thank you for last night. I ended up having that conversation. I hesitated for a moment. Then pressed send. Her reply arrived a few minutes later. How did it go? I stared at the screen before typing back. The way you probably expected. A few seconds passed. Then another message appeared. Do you want to talk about it over coffee? I didn't realize how much I needed that until I read the words. Later that afternoon, we met at a quiet cafe a few blocks from the restaurant where we had first met. When Elena walked in and saw me sitting by the window, her expression softened. Without saying a word, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around me in a gentle hug. The gesture was simple. But for those few seconds, the warmth of it made the weight of the past 24 hours feel a little easier to carry. The first time Elena and I met for coffee, it felt like a simple follow-up to an unusual evening. But somehow, that meeting quietly turned into another. And then another. At first, we kept things casual. A quick coffee after work. A short walk through the park on a Sunday afternoon. Sometimes we would meet near the same restaurant where we first spoke, though we rarely went inside again. Neither of us ever officially planned these meetings. They just happened. And slowly, without either of us saying it out loud, those small moments started becoming something we both looked forward to. A few weeks passed that way. During that time, my life had begun to shift in ways I was still adjusting to. My wife and I had started the difficult process of separating our lives, conversations about apartments, paperwork, and all the practical things that come with the quiet ending of a marriage. Those conversations were never dramatic. Just heavy. But whenever I met Elena afterward, something about her presence made the weight feel lighter. One evening we met in a small park not far from her neighborhood. The sun had already started dipping behind the buildings, casting long golden shadows across the walking paths. We found an empty bench near a row of trees and sat down beside each other. For a while, we simply watched the world move around us, people walking their dogs, couples talking quietly as they passed, the distant sound of traffic humming through the city. Our shoulders brushed lightly as we sat. Neither of us moved away. You seem calmer lately, Elena said after a moment. I thought about that. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm just getting used to the truth. She nodded slowly. That takes time. A soft breeze moved through the trees, and a loose strand of hair fell across my forehead. Without thinking much about it, Elena reached over and gently brushed it back into place. Her fingers barely touched my skin. But the gesture felt unexpectedly intimate. She seemed to realize it a second later and pulled her hand back with a small, almost shy smile. Sorry, she said quietly. I shook my head. It's okay. For a moment, neither of us spoke. But the air between us had shifted slightly. Later, as the sun disappeared completely and the park lights flickered on, we continued talking about smaller things, books we liked, places we had traveled, memories from years that felt both distant and close at the same time. The conversation was easy. Natural. But every now and then, I noticed something else. The way our eyes lingered a little longer when we looked at each other. The quiet pauses between sentences that carried unspoken thoughts. Eventually the evening grew cooler, and most of the park had emptied out. As we stood to leave, Elena turned toward me. For a moment she hesitated, studying my face the way someone does when deciding something important. Then she stepped slightly closer. Her hand rose slowly, resting gently against my cheek. The touch was soft and warm, her fingers lingering just long enough to make my heartbeat quicken. Before I could say anything, she leaned forward and placed a light kiss on my cheek. It lasted only a second. But the closeness of it stayed long after she stepped back. Her expression was thoughtful, almost uncertain. We should probably talk about what this is becoming, she said softly. I looked at her, realizing she had voiced the exact thought that had been quietly growing in my mind for days. Because somewhere between the restaurant, the walks, and the quiet conversations, comfort had slowly turned into something deeper. A few days after that evening in the park, Elena and I agreed to meet again. This time, the location wasn't accidental. It was intentional. When I arrived, I stood for a moment outside the entrance, looking up at the familiar building. The warm glow from inside spilled softly through the tall windows, just like it had the night everything unexpectedly began. 11 Madison Park. It felt strange returning to the same place. The restaurant where I had walked in searching for answers about my wife had somehow become tied to something completely different. Something new. When I stepped inside, the quiet elegance of the room felt just as I remembered it, the low conversations, the soft lighting, the gentle rhythm of glasses and plates moving between tables. But tonight, I wasn't here with uncertainty. I was here because of a choice. The hostess guided me to a table near the window. Only a few minutes later, Elena walked in. She wore a soft gray dress this time, simple but graceful. When she spotted me across the room, her expression warmed into that familiar smile I had come to recognize so easily. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Then she crossed the room and sat down across from me. Feels strange being back here, she said lightly, glancing around. Yeah, I admitted with a quiet laugh. The first time I came here, I thought I was about to catch my wife cheating. Elena smiled gently at that. And instead you met a stranger at the bar. A very observant stranger, I added. Dinner arrived slowly, just like before. But tonight the conversation carried a different weight. Not uncomfortable, just honest. At one point Elena rested her hands around her glass and looked at me thoughtfully. How are things, with everything, she asked carefully. I knew what she meant. The divorce process started last week, I said. The words felt strange but steady. It's not dramatic, I added. Just a lot of paperwork and difficult conversations. She nodded, her expression understanding. That part always feels heavier than people expect. For a moment we sat quietly, the restaurant's soft atmosphere surrounding us. Then Elena spoke again. I didn't expect this, she admitted. I looked up. Us, you mean? She smiled faintly. Yes. Her fingers traced lightly along the edge of her glass. You're younger than anyone I've ever been involved with, she said honestly. And when we first met, I thought I was just talking to someone who needed a friendly ear. I nodded slightly. That's what I thought too. And now, she asked softly. I looked at her for a moment before answering. Now I think meeting you might have been the best unexpected thing that's happened to me in a long time. Something warm passed through her eyes at that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I slowly reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture felt different from the brief touch weeks ago during our first dinner. This time it wasn't accidental. It was certain. Her fingers curled gently around mine. I don't know exactly where this goes, I said quietly. But I know I don't want to ignore what we've found. Elena studied my face for a moment, as if measuring the sincerity of the words. Then she smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Later, when we stepped outside together, the night air felt calm and familiar. As we began walking down the street, Elena slipped her arm lightly through mine. It was a simple gesture. But it carried quiet confidence. And as we walked beneath the glow of the streetlights, I realized something that felt almost poetic. The message that once shattered my sense of certainty,